Welcome to the first session of our Future of AMA series. I'm Sissy Hugh, and I'm the community lead here at Levels. Josh will be hosting today. He's the co-founder and president of Levels. And we have a guest appearance from Sam Corco, CEO of Levels. Josh will do a quick intro and share a few updates on what's happening at Levels, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Please drop your questions in the Slido link that I'll post in the chat and upvote your favorite questions. We'll snap a group photo at the end with your Series A mission patches. So if they're somewhere around the house, go grab them during the session. And so you all know we're recording the session and we'll be distributing the session on social after the event. I'll let you take it from here, Josh.
Awesome. Thank you, Sissy. Thanks everybody for joining today. Thanks for being a part of Levels. And I just want to start off by kind of giving a background on how we got to here. Crowdfund round, member investors. The purpose is incentive alignment. So ultimately, it is existential for our company that we have the same incentives that our members have. And part of that is the membership program initially, but then also part of that is finding ways to weave our members into the journey of building this company through the DNA of what we're building. And so there are many startup companies, many private companies that embrace secrecy. We kind of do the opposite. We embrace transparency. We think that that is critical, not just for creating that incentive alignment and the right messaging and course correction with back and forth between our members and us, but also for healthcare generally. We think that there needs to be a really healthy dose of transparency. And so expect that you now as investors in our company are going to get a lot of information, updates, our all hands meetings. You'll have access to essentially all the information that our existing cap table has had. And we'll be very excited to share that with you and also get information from you. So we know our member base has tremendous expertise and talent. We've had the luck of having many exceptional investors already on our cap table. We've had a tremendous number of benefits from that network that we've built. And so we hope to continue to use each and every one of you as a resource that we can co-depend on. So whether that's through using our product and sharing feedback, helping us build the portfolio that we need for the future, connecting us with potential teammates, and or of course correcting our message, the full spectrum. And so we're going to be working on some structure to help us leverage all of your expertise and your talent and your knowledge and get better at what we're doing. So looking forward to being able to learn from all of you, and just want to say in advance, really appreciate you being a resource for us and joining us on this mission. So stay tuned for more on that. And then I'm going to give a little intro as well on kind of what we're building here at Levels today and where we're heading, just to set the stage. And I think we'll transition into some call or some QA after that. So today, our mission remains what it was at the start of the company, which is to solve the metabolic health crisis. And the first step in that direction is to show people how food affects their health. So that's something that we're most focused on internally with our product and with our future product and service portfolio that we're building. There will be many steps to getting to the point where people understand how food affects their health. And the first step from where we stand today is liftoff, or what we're calling general availability. And all of you likely know that Levels has been an invitation-only beta mode for the last 2.5 years. There's a lot of reasons for that. We've been building the product in parallel with people using it and helping us direct our efforts. And also we've been working on the background with building a scalable system for us to bring in this important data and manage it between a number of hardware products. So next stage is liftoff. From there, we're going to couple that with an effort to push the science forward. So activating our data set, which will be the largest of its kind through institutional review board research studies. So these are approved by a committee of experts who look at the human research side of this, the data that we're producing, and essentially authorize us to perform anonymized analysis and research in order to better understand how metabolism changes, how it develops into outcomes, and where we should focus our efforts. So this data set and the institutional review board studies that we're rolling out along with general availability is going to certainly be a milestone in metabolic health, looking backwards from the future. So excited for that. Another major initiative that comes along with those efforts is nailing membership. So for those of you who have been familiar with Levels for a while now, you probably saw the membership model update that we made pretty recently. The goal there is to align long-term incentives. We want to make sure that people, no matter kind of what your goals are, where you are, we can meet you with the appropriate amount of product or service that you need and not develop dark patterns where we have to push our bottom line by pushing you to invest in things you don't need. And so membership is the way that we do that. If you're a member, you get access to our portfolio at cost, or as close to cost as we can get it with the predictions that we have, the estimates we can put in place. So that's critical to our mission. We're still working on getting that membership messaging right and getting the portfolio built out. So bear with us there, and please help us with feedback. Next is international expansion. So it's likely, despite how sideways things have gone with health in the United States, given the size of the global population, the majority of our membership base in the future is going to be outside the US. And so we're starting later this year with launch through the UK, and then we'll be expanding from there. So lots more detail to come there, but very excited for it. From there, we've reached liftoff or general availability. And by this point, the product will have made massive strides in showing people how food affects their health. And we will then be charting a path to a broader health service. So the research data set, the mechanistic and behavioral research that we're conducting already today are going to unite into a comprehensive model of how metabolic health develops, and ultimately how we can develop resilience as individuals. So that's the goal, is resilience to sickness, resilience to stress, resilience to aging. That's our ultimate goal. That's what optimal health looks like. So that's the future state. What we're calling that is biological observability. So the world where the Levels product can give you the observation of how your body is functioning, the cause and effect of changes, positive and negative, and ultimately controllability is the objective. And so we have a podcast called Biological Observability between Sam and I, where we kind of dive into this concept, but this is the end state for Levels. It is the world where you have the dashboard for how your body is functioning and the insight tools that you need to make targeted changes for an objective. And to get here, glucose is interesting, but insufficient to do entirely, the full spectrum of those changes. So this will be a future where we have many analytes available. So I just want to set the stage there. Here's where we are today. Here's where we're going. I'm excited to hear from all of you. I'm going to pause there, and I think we will transition into questions.
Thanks, Josh. Why don't we kick it off with the top question from Kateri on the Slido. The question is, what other biomarkers is Level planning to track in the future? And before you answer, Josh, just an FYI for everybody, if you want to ask a question, there is a raise your hand feature. If you go to reactions, there's a raise your hand. So feel free to jump in live. We'll start with the Slido for now. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah, very good question. So as I mentioned at the tail end there, biological observability is where we're heading. And that's the state. This actually, the concept comes from control systems theory, where if you want to control a complex system, you have to be able to observe how it responds to inputs and what the outputs are. So the first actual step to being able to control anything is observing it. And it's a bit of an abstract concept, but what it comes down to is that you need to be able to measure a certain number of things to be able to make the right inputs and changes to get the output you hope to achieve. And when it comes to health, glucose is not sufficient to do all of that. It's a powerful molecule. It gives us a ton of insight about our behaviors, but it won't be everything. So right now we have an ongoing project internally related to biological observability. It's a deconvolution project. So it's taking essentially all of the subject matter that's out there, all of the potential molecules that we could potentially measure, and simmering it down to those with highest leverage over health outcomes, specifically metabolic health outcomes for right now. There are a lot of metabolites. Glucose is one of those, and these are molecules that are either produced as primary inputs to metabolism, like what we're using for energy, or outputs, what your cells produce as byproducts of metabolism. And those are really interesting. They tell you how your cells are functioning, what your status is. Are you burning fat? Are you burning glucose? And those would be maybe glucose lactate, which is lactic acid. It's a byproduct of glucose metabolism. Fat molecules, so glycerol or ketones, can give you a really good insight into whether you're burning body fat or whether you're burning nutritional fat or glucose. And then likely triglycerides would be another really powerful one to tell you the kind of the other end of the spectrum from the glucose system, whether or not the fat sources that you have are breaking down the way that we want them to, and whether you're producing kind of a lot of extra fat in the blood. So those are super interesting. And then inflammatory and hormone markers are the other two main categories. So understanding where the sources of inflammation are coming from in your body is critical. Lifestyle has a major effect on inflammation. So the highest on the list, I would say, is high sensitivity C-reactive protein. We've introduced this already in our metabolic health panel, which you can get access to today through the app. And it gives you a really good indication of generalized inflammation, whether it's acute due to an injury or due to illness or due to a food sensitivity. It'll show up in CRP. Hormones are really the holy grail. So right now, detection of hormones is really challenging, especially in a continuous format. They are typically large molecules in very low concentrations, which means that they don't necessarily filter through to the surfaces of the body. So that said, they are the master molecule of cellular function. So if you look at the body as like a distributed system, the cells respond to the directions of the hormones. So when a hormone tells a cell to act, and it either does that thing that the hormone is directing it to, or it does not, that's really powerful information about how your body is functioning, whether you have, for example, insulin resistance. So if your insulin levels are high, that's telling your cells to do a certain thing, bring glucose out of the bloodstream. If your body's not doing that, then you know you have insulin resistance. It's a very high value indicator of your bodily function. And so hormones, insulin's one, cortisol is another, really powerful for stress. The sex hormones, estrogen, testosterone, progesterone is another powerful one. These all respond to our daily choices, and most importantly, they compound on each other over time. So that would give kind of the spectrum of the molecules that we are investing a lot of time right now in understanding, the behavioral levers that control these things and the non-behavioral lifestyle impacts. And eventually we will get a concise set that will be our primary objectives.
Great. Thanks, Josh. Maris, you have some great questions in the Slido. Do you want to jump in with your top 2 questions?
Sure. So my first question is, the app currently requires a decent amount of input from a user. Have you given any thought as to how to reduce that and still provide value for the user? And my second question is, how do you plan to expand the nutritionist initiative as well as the at-home biotesting?
Great questions. Yes. So, one of our core motives with Levels is to reduce the overhead necessary to use the product. So having a log is critical to understanding how food affects your health. And in other words, increasing the likelihood that someone inputs information about what they're eating is really important right now. It is much more likely that someone's going to do that if the burden is low. So if someone can just snap a picture, it's much better than having to, for example, type in macros and calorie count and quantities. So we've biased as close to the minimal information or optional information as possible without going to zero. And right now we're experimenting with improving the quality, particularly of camera vision. So we've integrated, we're testing several APIs that can do this function, but essentially integrating with food libraries so that we can take an image, you can just snap that picture, and then we can provide suggestions based on interpretation of what's in that photo. And you can just tap buttons and for ingredients. And so driving down the amount of manual work that you have to do to type in a full meal. And then in the future, I expect that we'll be able to improve the interpretation from not just understanding what that ingredient is, but then on the background, understanding what that ingredient is made of. So if it's, if it's cake, we can understand that is likely, unless you add some modifiers like almond flour cake, that's probably going to have a high concentration of processed grains and sugar. And so we'll start to be able to make these interpretations and then surface them to you in your zone scores and zone reports, so that you can then learn from those experiences with as little manual and entered information as possible. And then integrating additional analytes is going to be all about minimizing manual work. With the metabolic health panel, we really want to get access to the insights that you can learn from beyond continuous glucose. And there are a number of ways that we sort of A/B tested to figure out how we might get lab testing into the product. And we settled on in-home phlebotomy because it's as close to zero effort as possible. The at-home blood spot test, where you have to prick your finger and squeeze out a bunch of blood onto these papers, it works for some people, it doesn't work for others. And so we ended up finding that for the quality of the information, the gold standard is a blood draw, and doing it at home with an easy scheduling system seems to be really resonating. So we'll keep scaling that. We're not quite in all regions. It's mostly major metropolitan areas, but our goal is to scale out that initial metabolic health panel, get it to more people. And the next step, of course, is to turn those into insights. So not just get your lab work, but then what do you do about it? And so, yeah, I guess I would say that we are very focused on driving inputs down. We're experimenting with a new logging functionality actually right now internally, which is about as close to zero work as possible. It's literally like a photo and 2 sliders and you're done. So yeah, we'll continue to iterate here. And this is where you, our members, can really help us is, how much is too much, how much is too little, getting the right value for the effort that you put in. And then the nutritionist, I think you asked me about that as well. Right now we're in a holding pattern with the nutritionist program, mostly as we work to get into general availability and liftoff with the primary CGM product and metabolic health panel. The nutritionist, there was like sort of mixed feedback on how much value people were getting from the specific versus a more generalized case. So I think we will next experiment with probably cohort or community sort of group programs where you work with nutritionists as a team and everyone's kind of going through as a group together and learning essentially about the same thing simultaneously so that we can maximize the value of the nutritionist across many people without necessarily having to have a bunch of synchronous conversations, which are time consuming and take up a bunch of, of your precious time. So that'll be probably the next series of experiments that we'll do is with groups and cohorts.
Hey, Josh, this is Bobby Downs.
Hi, Bobby.
I have 2 questions for you. One is integration with Apple Health, which would possibly lead to integration with Whoop and Aura and 8 Sleep, all products that I have. And I'm very fascinated by the integration between all of these products and what I'm learning about my own health. And really, I see levels as the core ingredient to all these discoveries that I'm making around metabolic health, also showing that my sleep has a tremendous impact on my metabolic health and exercise, et cetera. Second question for you. So the first one is regarding sharing with Apple Health. The second question is, I noticed recently that Apple is working on blood glucose for a future Apple Watch. Not sure how far down the line they are, but what are your thoughts around that? Thank you.
Great questions. Thanks, Bobby. So on Apple Health integration, so we have started off by having read access. So we pull in integration information about exercise and sleep quality and other activity from Apple Health. We are definitely focused on getting write access as well. We want to make sure that our members have full control over the data that they're producing. The health information that you have should synergize really nicely in both directions. So we haven't been able to create the resource bandwidth to do this just yet, but look for it shortly, likely in the liftoff timeframe, we'll be able to get that going. And really excited to learn from how people are using those export features and whether or not we are hitting the right amount of integration. We had chosen not to go with specific point-to-point integrations, for example, directly with Garmin, for example. We've chosen not to do that as the Apple Health functionality gets better. We're finding that that sort of generalized integration is doing the right things for what our members need. And over time, I think we will select, these are the sort of key information vectors that people are learning from, and we'll be able to start to add more value around them. So sorry we don't have it yet. I hear you. I definitely want to get us there, and it will be soon. On Apple glucose detection. So I've talked a little bit about this in some podcasts because I've spent a lot of my personal time on the R&D front learning about how we'll get to biological observability. So in what ways are we likely to be able to detect the molecules that we need to detect for a sort of full spectrum awareness of many analytes? Apple is certainly working on glucose detection, and I'm hopeful that they will be able to crack it. Firstly, because it will massively validate the space and give us access to a very large, I believe the Apple Watch has shipped to over 100 million people as of last year. So, 100 million people with access to glucose would be incredible. That said, I don't think that the technology is physically capable of competing with a more sensitive and specific technology like the electrochemical enzymatic stuff that's in our CGMs today. So in terms of being able to see whether or not if someone is living with diabetes, whether or not they are in a very alarming high or low level, I think the Apple Watch could get there, and I really hope that it does. Getting to the point where someone who is trying to understand how their food's affecting their health, being able to tell between two different meals is going to be quite a bit more challenging. And I think it's going to take a long time to get us there. And then scaling beyond that to many molecules is going to be even more challenging. So the point is that Levels is device agnostic. We're here to leverage the metabolic health tools that we can and you can bet that if the Apple Watch cracks this, we will be accessing that information and integrating it with our platform as soon as we can, because I think the power will be tremendous. And then separately from that, we're looking for all technologies that could potentially get us to many analyte detection, and we'll be partnering accordingly.
Thanks, Josh.
Hey, Josh. Mike Colligan here. Bigger picture question, I think, as you look back over now a couple years down the road with the company, what were the biggest decisions in hindsight that you're saying, like, that was the key force multiplier to decision that has put us on the trajectory we're on? And if there's anything on the radar right now that you think over the next 6 to 12 months are going to be really important to get right, or kind of the one-way decisions that you guys talk about, what those would be as well? Great question.
Yeah, so I've been kind of working on this project for almost 4 years now, as a person who benefited so tremendously from just CGM by itself. And it's, the landscape has transformed since then. And I think the step function changes are mostly related to team, and then a few sort of outside events that were like transition points for the space generally. So for me, partnering up with Sam and our other co-founders was transformative. So we went from, I call our team members force multipliers because that's what they are. And it went from a single individual trying to essentially push forward, about 100 different sub projects I was, combining into one, to suddenly having world-class talent being able to break down the critical next steps for the biggest initiatives. And that has continued to be the case at every person that we brought on to this team, and even outside the Levels full-time team, with contractors and with our investor network, has been, it's been an acceleration. The second derivative is increasing. It's pretty unbelievable. So I would say for sure it's the team. And then a few of the other things that have changed are, frankly, COVID. COVID reinforced two major things that Levels was doing: focusing on metabolic health, telehealth in particular within that, and secondly, remote work and asynchronous work. And so validating essentially the underlying principles of what Levels is building. We're not just building a metabolic health technology, we're building a company that we're trying to align incentives with the people that we, ourselves, as users of the product, and the entire membership base, which eventually will be hundreds of millions of people if we succeed. So making those incentive alignments, and then also developing a culture that is truly fostering, I think, openness and transparency and honesty and integrity in a remote and asynchronous world. And so we, as COVID essentially brought attention to metabolic health as a driver of resilience, essentially to sickness, and then also everyone moved into at-home work, and we were able to really validate the processes that we had built and the culture we had built. And so I would say that those, as much as it is it is a tragic circumstance, I think it has brought attention to the underlying message that Levels is pushing, and was transformative along the way to get more attention on what we know people need to be paying attention to and have and empowered to take control of. So looking to the future, the kind of big force multipliers are going to be certainly, well, there's two major ones. We have a really powerful early adopter group. People are very invested in Levels today. It's amazing to see, but we have to get to the point where everyone can use this product and everyone has access to it. And that means affordable and accessible and international. And those are three challenging topics. A lot has to happen for us to get to the point where Levels is accessible to everyone and affordable. So essentially, the decisions that Levels has made to leverage existing devices and focus on the education and the accessibility and the actionability element was key to this. Staying device agnostic and helping people gain access to the tools and platforms that work best for them is another one. And then focusing on international expansion. And we will have to learn, it's not just about expanding the product we have, it's about localizing the product to different communities internationally and learning from each of those. It's going to be a very complex process, but getting those right is going to be crucial to us eventually succeeding in the mission. And I would argue that, well, I would just say that force multiplication, the way we get there is going to be through our team and community. So that, what we're doing right now is another force multiplier, I think, is having alignment with our member and community investors and having that sort of incentive driven into the DNA of what we're building.
Hey, Josh, I got one. Thanks to you and the team for doing this, by the way. I'm curious what kind of conversations have gone on internally and/or how you generally think about where and when levels intersects with mental health. It feels somewhat inevitable, but I'm also coming from a perspective of mental health drug development and the food world. So I'm curious how you'd respond to that.
Yeah, the links are really powerful, and the research is pretty strong that mental health, mental fitness, I would say, is correlated with physical health and physical fitness, which is probably not surprising for many of us in this group, but is actually quite surprising to people that you would, kind of the average person today who is looking at this in a very, these are separate verticals that don't really communicate. The metabolic system is the substrate for every cell in the body. And so if there's energetic problems in your muscle tissue, it's affecting the brain tissue as well. And so we're starting to see the connection be embraced by the healthcare system as we see Alzheimer's being referred to as type 3 diabetes, because it's brain insulin resistance is one of the key markers of Alzheimer's. And so we're starting to see, I think, more attention on the fact that these are not discrete, sections or subsystems. It's like, this is all one body, and the way that we're using energy is consistent or going to be affected in the same ways. Now, the tie between dementia, Alzheimer's, depression, and metabolic function is something that, again, most people don't think about. And so it's primarily educational. We have to push forward the information that's already available, which it's been understudied, honestly, as most of these things are. And we have to invest in the research to prove that these links are robust and repeatable. So it's very much going to be, early on, an educational thing, helping people get in touch with the patterns, the ebbs and flows of the markers that they are measuring, and correlating those with their experience. So the quality of life, how their mood, emotion functions. So we'll be bringing in more of these elements into our product as we go. And that will be really informative for people to just start to make those links themselves and in an N of one way. Like, I feel this way when these are happening. And then secondly, to really drive the point home is going to be that robust research where we do targeted cohort studies to connect the mental health initiatives. And, I would love to have this grounded in biomarkers, be able to track neurotransmitters and really show with evidence rather than with epidemiology that this is the case. But it's going to take some time to get there, I think. But, I would hope that in general, what we're pushing for here is resilience. And part of that is human flourishing. And we're not just trying to fix, a symptom. That's key. We're trying to make sure that people are set up for optimal health, and that covers the mental health system. So I expect that as you improve one, you'll improve both.
Josh, Christian here, just a quick comment rather than a question, but thank you for everything you're doing in the metabolic space, but also the organization space. I'm in the org design tech area, and I have nude feeds on LinkedIn with asynchronous ways of working coming up every day. And all I do is think about levels and how you're really sort of pioneers in this space, and I really appreciate your transparency, whether it's the Friday forums that come out on a weekly basis, your tips and tricks from a ways of working point of view. But yeah, just thanks for everything you're doing sort of in that space too.
Thanks a lot, Christian. Yeah, there's, I'm learning as well from, again, the force multipliers that I'm surrounded by on our team, where it's certainly more than the sum of its parts. And I think it's amazing to see people embracing that and learning from it. It's definitely an experiment. And, as everything is in a company, everything's an experiment. And I think what we're doing here is going to hopefully have a trickle down effect and produce a better way of working too, which would be great. It's all sums together. If we can lower the stresses of work, you can improve cortisol, which is going to improve as a glucocorticoid, glucose control. So there you go.
Thanks, Josh. Before we close out, we're going to do a quick group photo. So if you'd like to be in it, feel free to turn your video on. And if you have your mission patch, if you don't have your mission patch, it's totally fine. We'll just do a quick group photo that we'll feature, and then we can wrap. All right, we have a couple folks. Video on. 3, 2, 1. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Thank you all for your thoughtful questions and for joining the session. Keep an eye out for a brief feedback forum on how we can make these sessions better, and hope to see you at another one of these AMA sessions. Thank you. Have a great weekend. Thanks,
Thanks to everybody. Really, really appreciate this, and thanks for supporting us.